My daughter's husband stole everything I built. He gutted my business, forged my name, and vanished, leaving my pregnant daughter behind with nothing but lies. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Richard Wright from the city of North Pole, Alaska. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I wasn't born into money, and I sure as hell didn't marry into it either. Everything I owned, every brick, every bolt, every line of fine print in those contracts, came from sweat, broken backs, and long nights staring at numbers that didn't add up until they finally did. I ran a construction company in Kentucky, passed down in spirit if not in paperwork from my father, who laid foundations and died with calluses still thick on his hands. By the time I was 40, I had 5 crews, 3 trucks with my name on them, and a reputation that could outlast bad weather. People trusted me because I earned it the hard way, through silence, through showing up, through making sure everyone got paid before I did. So when my daughter, Lila, fell in love with a man who wore tailored shirts and spoke like he swallowed a TED Talk, I hesitated. But I smiled, shook his hand, and told myself maybe that's what legacy is, knowing when to let the next generation take the wheel. Jason was all charm, knew how to look you in the eye and make you feel like you mattered, which should have been my first warning. Guys like that usually disappear the moment things stop being easy. But Lila, she looked at him like he hung the damn stars. So I gave him a shot, not just in the family, but in the business. I figured if he learned the ropes, got some dirt under his nails, maybe he'd see the value in what we'd built. He started helping with the books, shadowing my accountant, then gradually moved into managing the new warehouse project. I didn't know he was already hollowing us out from the inside, like termites in a beam you trust until the whole thing crumbles. And when it did, it wasn't a slow fall. It was sudden. One Monday morning, I came in and the accounts were empty, the vendor checks bounced, and the bank called about a second mortgage I never signed. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of clerical error, a glitch. I went straight to the office and found my accountant crying at her desk. She handed me a stack of documents. He forged your name, Sam, on half of these. Jason had used my name, my ID, even had fake notarizations on things I didn't remember seeing. And the worst part? Lila was 8 months pregnant, sitting at home painting a nursery while her husband drained every drop of security from the life I gave her. I remember driving to their house that night, hands trembling on the steering wheel, heart thudding with a mix of rage and panic. But when I got there, he was already gone. He'd left her a note. It's not what it looks like. I'll explain everything soon. No forwarding address. No explanation. No goodbye. Lila was on the floor, clutching her belly, sobbing. She kept saying his name like it would summon him back. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to punch a hole through every wall he ever leaned on. But I just knelt beside her and held her, feeling like a failure in every role that mattered. Father, husband, businessman. I couldn't protect what I'd built, and worse, I couldn't protect her from the man I'd let into our lives. We went to the police. Fraud division. The guy behind the desk looked at the forged paperwork like he'd seen 100 just like it. You'll need to pursue this civilly, he said, like I had time for court dates and slow-moving justice. I explained that my daughter was about to give birth with nothing, no savings, no house, not even health insurance. He shrugged. If he crosses state lines with intent to defraud, maybe we'll have something. Maybe. I walked out of that station with a cold pit in my stomach. I realized then that justice was a coin toss, and men like Jason always landed heads up. Lila moved back in with me. I cleared out the guest room, hauled in her boxes, tried to pretend like this wasn't the second time I'd watched her start over. She stayed quiet most days, numb, moving through the hours like they weren't real. I tried to fill the silence with action, called every bank, froze what accounts I could, talked to a lawyer who charged me $200 just to tell me we'd likely never recover the full amount. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of wild turkey and stared at the old family photo on the wall. Me, Lila at 12, and her mother, now gone almost 7 years. I wondered what she'd say if she saw the mess I'd let into our lives. And then it hit me. No one was coming to fix this. Not the cops. Not the banks. Not some court 6 months from now. If I wanted to protect what little we had left, if I wanted Lila to bring that child into a world with even a shred of stability, I had to stop mourning and start moving. I wasn't going to chase him through lawyers and polite letters. I was going to do what I'd always done, go to the source, get my hands dirty, and make damn sure he knew what it felt like to lose everything. I stood up, poured the rest of the bourbon down the sink, and opened the drawer where I kept the old lockbox. Inside was my father's notebook, names, debts, favors owed. Half the people in there were ghosts now, but some weren't. Some still answered when you called late and spoke low. I didn't know where Jason was, but I knew the kind of man he was. And I knew how to find men like that. It was no longer about getting back what he stole. It was about making him understand what it cost me. I started with the banks. Not because I thought they'd help me. They already made it clear I was on my own, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Every check Jason wrote, every wire transfer he authorized, every withdrawal he masked as a business expense. I sat across from a junior fraud analyst at First Commonwealth, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, nervously pointing to a spreadsheet like I was just another statistic in their quarterly loss report. These wire transfers, he said, tapping the screen, they were sent to a holding account in Nevada. He looked at me like that should mean something. It didn't, not yet. I took the papers and drove straight to my old accountant, Ron. Retired now, but still sharp, and more importantly, still owed me for the time I bailed him out during his IRS scare in '09. He let me into his basement office, cluttered with boxes and old invoices. When I laid out the documents, he gave a low whistle. This isn't just embezzlement, Sam. He structured this to look legit, like planned insolvency. And these LLCs here. He pointed to a line of names I didn't recognize. Shell companies. Some in Delaware, some overseas. He wasn't just skimming. He was gutting you methodically. The rage was cold now, not like that first day. It had settled into my bones like a second skin. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded, slow and deliberate, and said, I need to know where he is. Ron looked at me long and hard. You going to the cops? I shook my head. They've got bigger fish. I've got bigger reasons. He didn't press me after that. Just handed me a list of the addresses tied to the shell companies. Most were empty P.O. boxes. But one was a warehouse in Vegas recently sold under a name I recognized from one of Jason's old LinkedIn profiles. It was a weak lead, but it was something. Back at home, Lila sat on the porch most evenings, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a cold glass of lemonade she rarely drank. She didn't talk much, but I saw it in her eyes. Questions, guilt, the slow erosion of trust. Did you find anything? She asked once, barely above a whisper. I sat beside her, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. He's smart, I said, but he's not as smart as he thinks. She looked down at her belly. Do you think he ever loved me? That was the question I hated most, because it was the one I didn't have the heart to answer. Instead, I gave her what I could. I think he loved the idea of you, and the life you gave him access to. She nodded, eyes fixed on the yard. We didn't say anything else that night, but I could feel her start to shift, grief turning into something harder, sharper. That mattered. If we were going to survive this, she needed to stop looking for the man she married and start seeing the man he really was. The next morning, I made calls. Quiet ones. I reached out to a guy named Benny who used to do security installs for high-end properties. He'd gone underground a few years back, but I knew he had ears in places I didn't. I told him what I was looking for. You're asking for a ghost, Sam, he said. These finance boys, they know how to disappear. I reminded him I once helped him move $10,000 in cash across county lines when his cousin got busted. He sighed. Fine, I'll sniff around. In the meantime, I got deeper into Jason's online footprint. He'd deleted most of it, but digital breadcrumbs are stubborn. I found an old Reddit thread where he bragged under an alias about flipping deadweight companies for profit. That was the word again, deadweight. It wasn't just a business move to him. He thought of us, me, as ballast to be cut loose. That stung more than anything. He hadn't just stolen. He'd disrespected everything I stood for. A week passed. Then Benny called. I got something. Not much, but a girl in Reno says she saw him playing at a private poker table. Used a different name, but matches the description. Drives a black Tesla, plates registered in Florida. I felt something snap into place. Jason didn't just vanish, he pivoted. Reinvented himself. New name. New life. Same scams. I packed a bag, told Lila I had to follow a lead. She didn't ask where. Just said, "Be careful, Dad." That was the first time she called me that in weeks. I kissed her forehead, promised I'd call every night. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her watching me from the porch, one hand on her stomach, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. That image stayed with me all the way to Nevada. Reno was loud and artificial, all neon and smoke. I found the poker club through Benny's contact, a velvet-roped hideaway tucked inside a rundown casino. The kind of place where no one asked for last names and buy-ins started at $5,000. I wasn't there to play, just to watch. I paid the bouncer $100 to let me sit at the bar where I had a view of the back tables. I waited 2 hours before I saw him. Jason, clean cut, wearing a watch I recognized as mine. Laughing, winning, like none of it ever touched him. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more. So I waited until he left, followed him at a distance. He walked to the Tesla, arm around a blonde half his age, kissed her like he meant it. She laughed, tossed her hair, and said, "You're such a shark, babe." I felt bile rise in my throat. I snapped a photo, stepped back into the shadows, and texted Benny. Got him. Need more. Benny replied with a voicemail Jason had accidentally left on a burner phone once used by one of his runners. I listened to it in the dark parking lot, my hand trembling as his voice poured through the speaker. Honestly, it was too easy. The old man practically handed me the keys. Took me 2 years, but I gutted that place. Time to level up. He laughed. Family man. Biggest liability in business. I sent the voicemail to Lila. I didn't say a word. I waited outside that casino for 2 more nights, watching Jason walk in and out like he owned the damn world. Always smiling. Always surrounded. He never looked over his shoulder, never moved like a man with enemies. That's what pride does to you. It makes you stupid. Makes you believe you're untouchable. I'd seen it before, back when I ran with tougher crowds during my early days in demolition. Guys who thought they were smarter than the game, faster than the fall. They never saw it coming until the ground gave out from beneath them. I called Benny again and asked if he could run the plates on Jason's Tesla. Within an hour, he sent me the address of a high-rise condo in Miami. That's where he's been nesting, he said. Found a sugar baby down there. Instagram model, I think. He's throwing money like he robbed a bank. I almost laughed. He didn't rob a bank. He robbed me. Every dollar he spent was my past, my sacrifice, my name. He bought bottle service with the pension I was supposed to leave Lila. Flew first class with the future I'd promised her. It wasn't just theft, it was legacy theft. I didn't drive to Miami right away. I wasn't done in Reno. I needed to understand his patterns. How he moved, who he trusted, what he feared. That meant digging where no search engine would take me. So I drove 2 hours out into the desert to see a man named Leo. We'd worked together years ago on an asbestos abatement job. He'd done time since, something about wire fraud and arson insurance scams. But Leo knew people who made Jason look like an amateur. He greeted me at the trailer door with a smirk. Damn, Sam. I thought you were dead or rich. Didn't think you'd come crawling back to the gutter. I need someone found, I said, handing him the photo I took outside the casino. I want to know who he talks to, who he owes, and where he keeps his secrets. Leo lit a cigarette and studied the photo. This ain't a hit, is it? If I wanted him dead, I'd have done it myself. He nodded, took a drag. You still got a stomach for the kind of people who answer these questions? I didn't hesitate. I'm not here to make friends. He set up a meeting with a loan shark named Marco who'd once fronted money to Jason, apparently under the table, for startup capital. That meeting happened in the back room of a rundown sports bar with grease-stained walls and a jukebox stuck on classic rock. Marco was built like a refrigerator and spoke in half sentences. Your boy? Owes me $60,000. Skipped town. That was 3 months ago. What did he promise you? I asked. Equity. Tech thing. Crypto bullshit. He chuckled. Slick tongue, empty wallet. Classic. Then he leaned forward. You here to pay me back? No, I said. I'm here to burn what's left of him. He laughed, deep and cruel. You're the father-in-law. I corrected. Marco reached into his coat, pulled out a phone, and played a recording. Jason's voice again, just a few weeks old. Just wait another month. I've got this contractor in Texas lined up. Old guy. Loaded. I'll flip him like I did the last one. Marco killed the recording and said, This the part where you ask for help. No, I said. This is the part where I offer you a trade. You help me destroy him. Publicly, legally, financially. And I make sure you're the first creditor he has to crawl back to. Marco grinned. I like you. Back in Kentucky, Lila was quieter over the phone. The baby had dropped. Any day now. I could hear it in her voice. Exhaustion, resignation, but something else too. Anger. I heard the voicemail, she said. The one you sent. There was silence for a beat. He never loved me, did he? No, I said. But that doesn't mean you weren't worth loving. She started to cry then, softly, and I let her. There's no easy way to bury a marriage, even one built on lies. But I needed her sharp, not broken. We had a child coming. We had to be ready. The next day, I flew to Miami. The condo tower was 28 floors of polished glass and concierge smiles. I wore a delivery uniform I borrowed from an old buddy and took the service elevator. I waited until Jason left, headed for a poolside meeting, probably to spin another lie, and then slipped into the hallway. It took less than 5 minutes to plant the burner phone in his apartment. Another 3 to sync it to my laptop. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to wound him, the way he wounded us. Quietly, with 1,000 cuts. So I started leaking pieces. A photo of him kissing his new girl at the same time Lila went into labor. A bank statement showing 5-figure withdrawals from my old accounts. An email chain showing how he funneled loan money into offshore havens. I sent them anonymously to his girlfriend, to his investors, to anyone stupid enough to think Jason was a legitimate businessman. By the end of the week, his accounts were flagged. His condo security revoked his keycard. His name started trending on a niche finance blog under the headline, Startup Scammer or Family Betrayer. The curious case of Jason R. I got a call from a block number late that night. His voice was raw, panicked. I don't know what you're doing, but you better stop. I didn't answer. Just let him talk. You think you're the only one who knows how to play dirty, he growled. I hung up. Then I called Lila. She was in the hospital. The baby was coming. I'm on my way, I told her. I made it to the hospital just before sunrise. Lila had already delivered 7 pounds, 1 ounce of quiet fury wrapped in a blue blanket. She named him Elijah. He had her eyes and a crease in his brow that reminded me of my father. I held him for the first time in a sterile room filled with the smell of antiseptic and fresh linen, and something shifted in me. Not softened, but deepened. There he was, my grandson, pulled into a world that hadn't asked him to choose sides yet. But one day he'd hear this story. One day, he'd know what his father did and what his grandfather did in return. Lila looked at me while I rocked him. Her face was pale but clear, strong in a way grief sometimes forces you to become. You still tracking him? She asked, voice hoarse. Yeah, I said. He's unraveling. Good. That was all. No apology for asking. No hesitation. Just a daughter reclaiming her power in 5 letters. Good. It told me she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was waking up. Jason had taken everything, but he hadn't taken her backbone. And that meant he didn't win. Not fully. The next day, I sat in my truck in a parking garage across the street from his Miami condo. He'd returned after 2 nights of silence. The girlfriend was gone. She'd taken her stuff while he was out. I knew that because I'd paid the concierge to tip me off. Jason came home to silence and suspicion, to frozen cards and pending fraud alerts. He paced in the window, phone glued to his ear, but no one was picking up. I watched him spiral through my binoculars, then finally stood and walked into the building. I wore a plain button-up and a contractor's ID badge. The guard nodded me through. It was too easy. Jason had made too many enemies and not enough allies. I knocked on his door just once. He opened it shirtless, eyes bloodshot, and froze. What the hell? I pushed past him. He stumbled back as I walked inside like I owned the place. He started to bluster. "You can't be here. This is private property. Sit down, Jason," I said, cold and steady, "before I break your kneecaps and claim self-defense." His jaw tightened. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said, pulling a folder from my coat. "I've gained clarity." I dropped the documents on the kitchen counter: bank transfers, shell companies, fraudulent contracts. I laid them out like cards in a final poker hand. He looked down at the papers, then back at me. His smirk twitched, almost came out, but didn't. "You kept all this." "I didn't keep it. I built it. The case. The trail. The noose." His voice dropped, still trying to find a foothold. "You can't prove intent. This'll take years to litigate. You'll run out of money before I do." "I don't want your money," I said, stepping closer. "I want your name. I want your credibility. And I want your silence. You're going to sign over every account, every asset, every company. Today." He laughed, short, bitter. "And if I don't?" I didn't blink. "Then I make this public. And not just through lawyers. Through your investors. Your ex-girlfriend. Your new marks. I'll send them voice recordings, text messages, tax documents. You know what happens when white-collar crimes make Reddit? You lose the only thing you ever really cared about: your reputation." He looked away, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly. "You think you've won. I know I have. Because this time, I'm not playing by the rules either." He sat down, shoulders sagging, and stared at the table. For a long minute, he didn't move. Then he said, "You really hate me that much?" "No," I said. "I hate what you did. But I pity you. You could have had a family, a legacy. Instead, you sold it for a Tesla and some Instagram clout." I handed him a pen and pointed to the documents. "Sign." He signed. It took 20 minutes to transfer ownerships, revoke powers of attorney, and initiate bank reversals. I recorded everything. I had witnesses. I left nothing to chance. When I walked out of that condo, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of justice. Not clean, not pure, but necessary. That night, I sat in a diner just off I-95 and watched the news scroll across my phone. Jason's name was starting to appear in forums and finance blogs again. This time not as a golden boy, but as a cautionary tale. Fraud allegations surface against Miami entrepreneur. I didn't leak everything yet. I wanted to leave him with the uncertainty, the dread, knowing I could ruin him completely at any moment. Lila called while I sipped my coffee. Elijah was asleep. "He signed?" she asked. "Yeah." "You get it all back?" "Not all," I said. "But enough." She paused. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "This isn't over. Not for him." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I hope he sees your face in every shadow." "So do I. I always believed destruction wasn't something you chased. It was something you controlled. You didn't swing wildly. You aimed. You measured. You dismantled piece by piece until nothing stood but the truth. And truth? That was what Jason had never counted on. Not just that I'd come for him, but that I'd do it slowly. That I'd make him feel every inch of the ground crumble beneath him until he begged for the fall. I didn't send everything at once. I let it drip, strategic leaks to investors, minor regulators, a few of the more gossip-hungry finance influencers who loved a good startup scammer gets exposed headline. Screenshots of altered financial documents. Audio snippets where Jason laughed about old-timers who can't keep up. Emails where he boasted about cleaning out a redneck construction company. It wasn't just the content. It was the way I fed it into the ecosystem. A well-timed Reddit thread here, an anonymous tip to a watchdog blog there. The kind of momentum that builds without mercy. 3 days after I walked out of that Miami condo, Jason's face hit Twitter. A low-tier journalist posted a video calling him the Silicon Snake. In it, she laid out the shell companies, the falsified loans, the lawsuit threats from his old investors. She even referenced the voice message I'd leaked. The one where he called family a liability. That one hit harder than any lawsuit ever could. Because once the internet decides you're guilty, no rebrand can save you. He tried to fight back. Released a statement claiming he was the real victim, blaming a disgruntled ex-father-in-law with a vendetta. But it backfired. Fast. People dug up old posts, questioned his timelines, pointed out his sudden wealth just months before my company collapsed. His girlfriend went on Instagram Live and accused him of gaslighting and theft. She held up one of the luxury watches he'd given her. He said it was a family heirloom, she said, voice shaking. Now I don't even know who he is. I watched it from Lila's living room. She sat beside me on the couch, Elijah in her arms. The baby was quiet, blinking up at us like he understood everything. She didn't say a word during the video. When it ended, she looked at me and said, I didn't think I'd feel anything. But I do. Good. I asked. No, she whispered. Clean. That word stayed with me. Clean. Not victorious. Not healed. Just clean. Like scrubbing out a wound and knowing it'll scar, but at least it won't rot. That was what this had become. Not revenge, not really. It was about infection. About cutting out what was sick before it could poison the rest of our lives. Jason disappeared again. Deleted his accounts. Abandoned the condo. Word was, he checked into a cheap motel in Pompano Beach under a fake name. I didn't chase him this time. I didn't have to. He was running on fumes, paranoid, broke, and watching his empire dissolve in real time. Then came the final blow. I filed a formal complaint with the IRS using the documents he'd signed. Ron, my old accountant, helped me compile it. Every detail precise, every transfer accounted for. I mailed it certified with copies to 2 former clients of Jason's who'd also been burned. Within a week, his accounts were frozen. Not because of me directly, but because someone at the IRS flagged his unexplained gains and sent it up the ladder. The dominoes had been lined up. All I did was tap the first one. He tried to call me after that. Blocked number. I let it ring. He sent a message 2 days later. You ruined me. I stared at that text for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought about Elijah, what kind of world he was born into. I thought about Lila, how she'd looked the day Jason left, and how she looked now, stronger somehow. And I thought about myself, not who I was, but who I'd become. A man who lost everything but refused to let that be the end. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the garage, opened the old chest where I'd stored my father's tools, the ones I hadn't touched since Jason took over. I pulled out the hammer and ran my fingers over the worn grip. Then I walked to the back of the property, to the half-finished shed Lila wanted to convert into her new office for the design firm she was launching. It was just a skeleton, framing, studs, no drywall yet. But it was real. It was ours. I spent the rest of that afternoon laying the floorboards. One nail at a time. One line of progress I could see, touch, and own. That night, as the sun dipped below the tree line, Lila stepped outside, Elijah swaddled in her arms. She watched me work, didn't say a word until I looked up. Looks good, she said. It will, I replied. Just needs a few more layers. She nodded. Kind of like us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Vengeance doesn't end when you win. That's the lie they sell you in movies. That there's a moment of glory, of final justice, and then the credits roll. But real life doesn't give you a soundtrack. It gives you aftermath. It gives you silence. And in that silence, you have to live with what you did, who you became, and what you gave up to feel whole again. After Jason vanished for good, I started sleeping again, but not through the night. I'd wake up at 3:14 a.m. like clockwork, heart thudding, lungs tight, drenched in sweat from dreams I never remembered. I'd sit on the porch with a mug of coffee that went cold before sunrise and listen to the hum of crickets, the creak of old wood settling, the far-off bark of some neighbor's dog. That was the cost. Peace returned, but never the way it used to be. Because peace built on scorched earth is still scorched, it just grows different things. Lila's firm launched quietly. She named it Elijah Interiors, after her son. Clients trickled in slowly. Some old connections, some new mothers who'd seen her story online and wanted to support a strong woman starting over. I built her a sign from scrap wood and iron brackets I'd salvaged from a warehouse Jason had nearly sold out from under me. There was something poetic about that, using the remnants of what he tried to destroy to build what he couldn't touch. Every so often, someone would ask where he was. Lila would shrug. Gone. I never elaborated. Let the mystery eat at them. Let his silence tell the story. I never wanted Elijah to grow up seeing his father through the lens of my rage. One day, when he was old enough, I'd tell him the truth, but I'd do it with dignity. Not for Jason's sake. For Elijah's. I visited my old office building once, just to see what remained. The parking lot was cracked, weeds curling through the asphalt. The windows were boarded up, and a foreclosure notice flapped against the front door like a white flag. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and stared for a long time. Not at what I'd lost, but at what I'd let go of. That business raised me, made me a man, but it didn't make me a father. And when it came down to it, being a father was the one job I couldn't afford to fail again. I got a letter from the state's attorney 6 weeks later. Jason had officially been indicted on charges related to wire fraud and identity theft. They'd built a case from the trail I left. I was asked to testify. I declined, not out of fear, but because I didn't need a courtroom to feel closure. My work was already done. Instead, I wrote a letter. I didn't send it, just folded it and tucked it into the same lockbox where my father's notebook still lived. In it, I told Jason everything he'd taken. Not the money, not the trucks, the time, the trust, the nights I sat by Lila's hospital bed praying she wouldn't fall apart, the months I spent convincing her she wasn't stupid for believing him. The meals skipped, the sleep lost, the dreams deferred, and then I told him what he gave me, a reminder of who I am. A man who doesn't quit, a man who loves hard, fights harder, and rebuilds what others try to burn. The next morning, I took Elijah for a walk. Lila handed him to me with this look, half exhaustion, half awe, like she still couldn't believe he was hers. I held him close, felt the small thud of his heartbeat against my chest. We walked down the gravel path behind the house. Past the shed we turned into her office. The sign I made hung proud above the door. He started to fuss halfway down the trail, so I stopped, bounced him gently, whispered nonsense that made no difference but calmed us both. I looked down at him, his round cheeks, his wide eyes, that same furrow in his brow that I wore the day I found out everything was gone. He'd never know the version of me who smiled easily. But maybe he'd know the one who stood tall, who fought when it mattered, who protected what couldn't be replaced. And that's when I realized I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need redemption. I needed boundaries. A line drawn in blood and experience that said, you don't get to come back after what you've done. Jason might still be out there, somewhere, living cheap, lying low, but he doesn't own a single part of our story anymore. He's a footnote in a legacy he tried to steal. And we're the ones who survived it. If this story hit home, if it made you think about the people who've crossed your lines or tested your loyalty, speak up in the comments. What would you do to protect your family from betrayal? Don't just watch, engage. Your voice matters more than you think. See you soon in the next story.